Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing journal collection number 32, which dates from the year 1841 when Emerson was 38 years old. And we are in the middle of that year. He's not written the exact date of some of these entries, which is kind of curious because he's done really well doing that all the way up until now. I've not looked far enough ahead to see if this is a pattern that will begin starting now or not, but I can just say that we are vaguely in August, I believe. And the next entry states that it's September, although it is also not specific. And real quick before I go ahead and start reading, one housekeeping thing. Some of you might notice every blue moon you might hear a slight pop sound. That is the radiators in my house, which unfortunately are in every single room of my house. So if I moved my computer and my setup to and my speaker anywhere, you're still going to hear a slight popping sound. I can't escape it. So I'm just sticking where I am. The reason why you can hear those is because it's winter and the radiators are in the midst of heating up and cooling down, and these little popping sounds show up here and there. And I've tried to get rid of them sort of in post, try to get through them, but quite a bit of them happen in the middle of what I'm saying. And sometimes when I go back, I don't hear them, but then every now and then they do show up faintly. But I try to get rid of the ones that I could that are very obvious that take place in between pauses. But that's what's going on. Hopefully, it's not too distracting. And with that said, I'll go ahead and get started reading. Tropes. Every gardener can change his flowers and leaves into fruit, and so is the genius that today can upheave and balance and toss every object in nature for his metaphor, capable in his next manifestation of playing such a game with his hands instead of his brain. An instinctive suspicion that this may befall seems to have crept into the mind of men. What would happen to us who live on the surface if this fellow in some new transmigration should have acquired power to do what he now delights to say? He must be watched. For me, what I may call the autumnal style of Montaigne keeps all its old attraction. Your reading you may use in conversation, but your writing should stop with your own thought. The whole history of Sparta seems to be a picture or text of self-reliance. Waldo's diplomacy in giving account of Ellen's loud cries declares that she put her foot into his sand-house and got pushed. Democracy. Caius Gracchus, Plutarch says, first among the Romans, turned himself in addressing the people from facing the Senate house, as was usual, and faced the forum. The trumpet-like lowing of a cow, what does that speak to in me? Not to my understanding, no, yet somewhat in me hears and loves it well. I am glad to have guests who can entertain each other, and if I cannot find a second guest in our narrow village to keep the first in play, then I would have pictures, statues, an observatory and telescope, a garden. Somewhat that can bear the brunt of the stranger's arrival and allow me to play a second part and be a guest in my own house. But when the friend shall come, then the smallest closet in my house is wide enough for our entertainment. Has not pedantry been defined a transference of the language of one district of thought or action to another district, not in the way of rhetoric, but from a bigoted belief that it is intrinsically preferable? I remember some remark of Coleridge that is tantamount to this. I easily see that the spirit of life finds equal exercise in war, in chemistry, or in poetry. I see the law of nature equally exemplified in bar-room and in a saloon of philosophers. I get instruction and the opportunities of my genius indifferently in all places, companies, and pursuits, so only that there be antagonism. Yet there would be the greatest practical inconvenience if, because the same law appears indifferently in all, we should bring the philosophers of the bar-room and of the saloon together, like to like. Short note from the editor. Here follows most of the matter printed in the first 2 pages of Character, Essays, second series. Character is that reserved force which acts only by presence, and not by visible or analyzable methods. Samuel Hoare accomplishes everything by the aid of this weapon, not by talent, not by eloquence, not by magnetism. We feel that the largest part of the man has never yet been brought into action. As modern warfare is war of posts and not of battles, so these victories are by demonstration the superiority and not by conflict. If one should go into State Street or much lower places, he would find that the battle there is fought and won by the same grand agents. Lord Bacon's method in his books is of the understanding, but his sentences are lighted by ideas. The fame of Burns also is too great for the facts. Lotus Eaters. I suppose there is no more abandoned epicure or opium eater than I. I taste every hour of these autumn days. Every light from the sky, every shadow on the earth, ministers to my pleasure. I love this gas. I grudge to move, or to labor, or to change my book, or to will, lest I should disturb the sweet dream. Our people are easily pleased, but I wonder to see how rare is any deviation from the routine. If Mr. and Mrs. Wigglesworth go to walk with their family in the mornings, they are the speculation of Boston. The moment is all. The boys like to have their swing of peaches once in the season, and it suffices them, or of plums or cherries. We like to be rested, we like to be thoroughly tired by labor. I sit on a stone and look at the pond and feel that having basked in a nature so vast and splendid, I can afford to decease, and yet the antecedent generations have not quite lost their labor. Quote, in the heat of the battle, Pericles smiled on me and passed on to another detachment. Quoted from Landor's Imaginary Conversations. I find a few passages in my biography noticeable, but it is the present state of mind which selects those anecdotes, and the selection characterizes the state of mind. All the passages will in turn be brought out. Dr. Osgood said of P.'s sermon that it was patty cake. In history, the soul spreads itself enormous, eccentric, and allows no rash inductions. The men who evince the force of the moral sentiment and of genius are not normal, canonical people, but wild and Ishmaelitish, Cromwells, Napoleons, Shakespeares, and the like. The fine doctrine of availableness, which gave the Whig party John Tyler for their president, reaches into the politics of every parish and school district. In Plutarch's Life of Demosthenes, it is quoted from the philosopher that through all his orations runs one idea, that virtue secures its own success. Dandies of moral sentiment. I, credulous, listened to his fine sentiment, and wondered what must be the life of which the ornaments were so costly. And coming again, he lived there no longer. He was now such a tradesman as other tradesmen are, and he recognized my face with patronage and pity. The fancies of the boy exceed 100-fold the fruitions of the man. September. A poet is very rare. I spoke the other day to Ellery's ambition and said, think that in so many millions, perhaps there is not another one whose thought can flow into music. Will you not do what you are created to do? But Ellery, though he has fine glances and a poetry that is like an exquisite nerve communicating my thrills, yet is a very imperfect artist, and as it now seems will never finish anything. He does not even like to distinguish between what is good and what is not in his verses, would fain have it all pass for good, for the best, and claim inspiration for the worst lines. But he is very good company with his taste and his cool, hard, sensible behavior, yet with the capacity of melting to emotion or of wakening to the most genial mirth. It is no affectation in him to talk of politics, of knives and forks, or of sanded floors, if you will. Indeed, the conversation always begins low down, and at the least faltering or excess on the high keys, instantly returns to the weather, the Concord reading room, and Mr. Rice's shop. Now and then something appears that gives you to pause and think. First, I ask myself if it is real or only a flitting shade of thought spoken before it was half realized. Then, if it sometimes appears, as it does, that there is in him a wonderful respect for mere humors of the mind, for very gentle and delicate courses of behavior, then I am tempted to ask if the poet will not be too expensive to the man, whether the man could afford such costly self-denials and fineness to the poet. But his feeling, as his poetry, only runs in veins, and he is, much of the time, a very common and unedifying sort of person. September 4th. Rightly says Elizabeth that we do not like to hear our authors censured, for we love them by sympathy as well as for cause, and do not wish to have a reason put in the mouth of their enemies. It is excellent criticism, and I will write it into my piece. September 11th. The Poet, the Maker. It is much to write sentences. It is more to add method and write out the spirit of your life symmetrically. Of all the persons who read good books and converse about them, the greater part are content to say, I was pleased, or I was displeased. It may be active or inactive, and rarely does one eliminate and express the peculiar quality of that life which the book awoke in him. So rare is a general reflection. But to arrange many general reflections in their natural order, so that I shall have one homogeneous piece, a Lycidas, an Allegro, a Penseroso, a Hamlet, a Macbeth, a Midsummer Night's Dream, this continuity is for the great. The wonderful men are wonderful hereby. The observations that Pythagoras made respecting sound and music are not in themselves unusually acute, but he goes on, adds fact to fact, makes 2 steps, 3, or even 4, and every additional step counts 1,000 years to his fame. September 12th. Osmond said that when he went a-berrying, the devil got into the blueberries and tempted him to eat a bellyful. But if he came to a spring of water, he would wash his hands and mouth and promise himself that he would eat no more. Instantly the devil would come to him again in the shape of larger and fairer berries than any he had yet found, and if he still passed them by, he would bring him blackberries, and if that would not serve, then grapes. He said of one thing he was persuaded, that wisdom and berries grew on the same bushes, but that only one could ever be plucked at one time. Optimates. Sir, said Heavenborn, the amount of labor you have spent on that piece is disgraceful. For me, not even my industry shall violate my sentiment. I will sit down in that corner and perish, unless I am commanded by the universe to rise and work. And what became of Heavenborn? What a pragmatical question. Nothing to tell of. Yet I suppose the new spirit that animates this crop of young philosophers, and perhaps the fine weather at this very hour, this thoughtful autumnal air, may be some of his work, since he is now, as we say, dead. Osman. Our low and flat experiences have no right to speak of what is sacred. Out of a true reverence, which is all the good we have left us, we do not recognize the existence of God and nature, but do what we can to exterminate them from the category of being. If I should ever be better, I will grant you their existence. But I sympathize with all the sad angels who on this planet of ours are striking work and crying, oh, for something worthy to do. Life, Osman. We are all of us very near to sublimity. As one step freed Wordsworth's recluse on the mountains from the blinding mist, and brought him to the view of glory beyond all glory ever seen, so near are all to a vision of which Homer and Shakespeare are only hints and types, and yet cannot we take that one step. It does not seem worth our while to toil for anything so pitiful as skill to do any of the little feats we magnify so much, when presently the dream will scatter and we shall burst into universal power. The reason of all idleness and of all crime is the same. Whilst we are waiting, we beguile the time, one with jokes, one with sleep, one with eating, one with crimes. It is pedantry to give such importance to property. Whoso does shows how much he desires it. Can I not play the game with these counters as well as with those? with land and money as well as with brown bread and serge. A good wrestler does not need the costume of the ring, and it is only indifferent writers who are so hard to be suited with a pen. Quote, I will not sign any petition that Mr. D may hold his office. He and his party have been doing all they could to destroy my business and drive me to saw wood for a living, and now he may saw wood himself, said my neighbor the manufacturer. And that is the repute in which the solid part of the community hold labor. To such men no wonder that the fact of George Ripley's association should appear wonderful, men of the highest cultivation leaving their libraries and going out in blue frocks and cowhide boots into the barnyard and peat bog. They think it a freak, but when they find it lasting, and that the plans of year are based on it, they revise their own positions. Antony and Cleopatra and old King George III dressed themselves in kersey and went out incogniti. Jones Very told George Bradford that, quote, he valued his poems not because they were his, but because they were not, Quote, the transcendentalists do not err in excess, but in defect, if I understand the case. They do not hold wild dreams for realities. The vision is deeper, broader, more spiritual than they have seen. They do not believe with too strong faith. Their faith is too dim of sight, too feeble of grasp, too wanting in certainty. Reverend Thomas T. Stone's letter to MME, June 1841. September 21st. Dr. Ripley died this morning. The fall of this oak of 90 years makes some sensation in the forest, old and doomed as it was. He has identified himself with the forms at least of the old church of the New England Puritans. His nature was eminently loyal, not in the least adventurous or democratical, and his whole being leaned backward on the departed, so that he seemed one of the rear guard of this great camp and army which have filled the world with fame, and with him passes out of sight almost the last banner and guidon flag of a mighty epoch. For these Puritans, however in our last days they have declined into ritualists, solemnized the heyday of their strength by the planting and the liberating of America. Great grim, earnest men, I belong by natural affinity to other thoughts and schools than yours, but my affection hovers respectfully about your retiring footprints, your unpainted churches, strict platforms, and sad offices, the iron gray deacon, and the wearisome prayer rich with the diction of ages. Well, the new is only the seed of the old. What is this abolition and non-resistance and temperance but the continuation of Puritanism, though it operate inevitably the destruction of the church in which it grew, as the new is always making the old superfluous? He was a punctual fulfiller of all duties. What order, what prudence! No waste and no stint, always open-handed, just and generous. My little boy a week ago carried him a peach in a calabash, but the calabash brought home 2 pears. I carried him melons in a basket, but the basket came home with apples. He subscribed to all charities. He was the most public-spirited citizen in this town. He gave the land for the monument. He knew the value of $1 as well as another man, yet he always sold cheaper than any other man. Quote, woe that the linden and the vine should bloom, and a just man be gathered to the tomb. But out of his own ground he was not good for aught. To talk with the insane he was as mad as they. To speculate with the thoughtful and the haters of forms he was lost and foolish. Credulous and opinionative, a great browbeater of the poor old fathers who still survived from the 19th of April in order to make them testify to his history as he had written it. A man of no enthusiasm, no sentiment. His horror at the doctrine of non-resistance was amusing. He was a man very easy to read, for his whole life and conversation was consistent and transparent. In college, F. King told me from Governor Gore, who was the doctor's classmate, he was called Holy Ripley, perhaps in derision, perhaps in sadness, and now in his old age, when all the antique Hebraism and customs are going to pieces, it is fit he too should depart, most fit that in the fall of laws a loyal man should die. Shall I not say in general of him, that, given his constitution, his life was harmonious and perfect? His body is a handsome and noble spectacle. My mother was moved just now to call it the beauty of the dead. He looks like a sachem fallen in the forest, or rather like a warrior taking his rest with his martial cloak around him. I carried Waldo to see him, and he testified neither repulsion nor surprise, but only the quietest curiosity. He was 90 years old the last May, yet this face has the tension and resolution of vigorous manhood. He has been a very temperate man. A man is but a little thing in the midst of these great objects of nature, the mountains, the clouds, and the cope of the horizon, and the globes of heaven. Yet a man by moral quality may abolish all thoughts of magnitude, and in his manners equal the majesty of the world. September 28th. Temperament. Every man, no doubt, is eloquent once in his life. The only difference betwixt us is that we boil at different degrees of the thermometer. This man is brought to the boiling point by the excitement of conversation in the parlor. That man requires the additional caloric of a large meeting, a public debate, and a third needs an antagonist, or a great indignation. A fourth must have a revolution, and a fifth nothing less than the grandeur of absolute ideas, the splendors of heaven and hell, the vastness of truth and love. The whole state of society, of course, depends on that law of the soul which all must read sooner or later. As I am, so I see. My state for the first time must always get represented in my companion's nuptial, mercantile, or municipal, as well as in my face and my fortunes. Quote, a new friend is like a new wine. When it is old, thou shalt drink it with pleasure. Ecclesiasticus 9:10. Quote, one avenue was shaded from thine eyes, through which I wandered to eternal truth. Acquiescence, patience, have a large part to play. The plenty of the poorest place is too great. The harvest cannot be gathered. The thought that I think excludes me from all other thoughts. Culture is to cherish a great susceptibility, to turn the man into eyes, but as the eye can see only that which is eye-form, or of its own state, we tumble on our walls in every part of the universe, and must take such luck as we find and be thankful. Let us deserve to see. Too feeble and faint fall the impressions of nature on the sense. Let us not dull them by intemperance and sleep. Too partially we utter them again. The symbols in which I had hoped to convey a universal sense are rejected as partial. What remains but to acquiesce in the faith that by not lying, nor being angry, we shall at last acquire the voice and language of a man. Sun and moon are the tablets on which the name and fame of the good are inscribed. Nature is the silent man. It would be well if at our schools some course of lessons in idealism were given by way of showing each good Whig the gunpowder train which lies under the ground on which he stands so firmly. Let him know that he speaks to ghosts and phantasms. Let him distinguish between a true man and a ghost. Quote, we do not wake up every morning at 4 to write what all the world thinks, said the good German. The inevitableness of the new spirit is the grand fact, and that no man lays to heart or sees how the hope and palladium of mankind is there. But one blushes and timidly insinuates palliating circumstances, and one jeers at the foible or absurdity of some of its advocates. But on comes the God to confirm and to destroy, to work through us if we be willing, to crush us if we resist. No great cause is ever defended on its merits. If I should take the sum of the annual registers of the Red Books, of the scientific associations, of the Lloyd's lists and Bicknell's reporters, I should not get the age which this Pinewood speaks of. Boston. Natural History Society, Athenaeum and Galleries, Lowell Institute, Lyceum, Mechanics' Fair, Cambridge College, Father Taylor, State House, Faneuil Hall, Bookshops, Tremont Theater. Men. Taylor, Webster, Bancroft, Frothingham, Reed, Ward. There is a great destiny which comes in with this as with every age, which is colossal in its traits, terrible in its strength, which cannot be tamed or criticized or subdued. It is shared by every man and woman of the time, for it is by it they live. As a vast solid phalanx the generation comes on, they have the same features, and their pattern is new in the world. All wear the same expression, but it is that which they do not detect in each other. It is this one life which ponders in the philosophers, which drudges in the laborers, which basks in the poets, which dilates in the love of the women. Fear not, but this is full of romance, the wildest sea or mountain or desert. Life is not more instinct with aboriginal force. This is that which inspires every new exertion that is made. It is this which makes life sweet to them, this which the ambitious seek power that they may control. This they wish to be rich that they may buy. When they marry, it is out of love of this. When they study, it is this which they pour after, and would read or write. It is new in the universe. It is the attraction of time. It is the wonder of the infinite. It is the last painting of the Creator. Calm and perfect it lies on the brow of the enormous eternity. And if there be any abode for permanent spectators, what is there they would study but this? The cumulative result, the new morning with all its dews, rich with the spoils of all foregoing time. Is there not something droll to see the firstborn of this age ignorant of the deep, prophetic charm that makes the individual nothing, interrupting the awe and gladness of the time with their officious lamentations that they are critical and know too much? Are they not torn up in a whirlwind, borne by its force, they know not whence, they know not whither, yet settling their robes and faces in the moment they fly by with me this self-crimination of ennui? If ever anybody had found out how so much as a rye straw is made. Feeble persons are occupied with themselves, with what they have knowingly done, and what they propose to do, and they talk much hereof with modesty and fear. The strong persons look at themselves as facts, in which they involuntarily part, as so much as to fill all their wonder, and leave them no countenance to say anything of what is so trivial as their private thinking and doing. I can well speak of myself as a figure in a panorama so absorbing. The whole game at which the philosopher busies himself every day, year in or year out, is to find the upper and the under side of every block in his way. Nothing so large and nothing so thin but it has two sides, and when he has seen the outside, he turns it over to see the other face. We never tire of this game, because ever a slight shudder of astonishment pervades us at the exhibitions of the other side of the button, at the contrast of the two sides. The head and the tail are called in the language of philosophy finite and infinite, visible and spiritual, relative and absolute, apparent and eternal, and many more fine names. The Poet. I was astonished one morning by tidings that genius had appeared in a youth who sat near me at table. It is strange how fast experience and idea, the wonderful twins, the Castor and Pollux of our firmament, change places. One rises and the other instantaneously sets. Today and for 100 days experience has been in the ascendant, and idea has lurked about the life merely to enhance sensation. The firework maker and the master of revels and hired poet of the powers that be. But in a moment a revolution. The dream displaces the working day and the working world, and they are now the dream and this the reality. All the old landmarks are swept away in a flood in geography and history. The laws and manners, aim and method of society are as fugitive as the colors which chase each other when we close our eyes. All experience has become mere language now. Idea drags it now, a chained poet, to adorn and sing his triumph. Chilmark. Sir, I have your note for a small debt. Can you pay it today? Hyannis. Far otherwise. Perhaps you have brought me money. Chilmark. No. Hyannis. I contracted that debt when I bought and sold. Now I protest against the market. The word pay is immoral. Chilmark. It is best to be off with the old love before you be on with the new. In Berlin, it was publicly reported at the Teetables that Fichte had declared his disbelief in the existence of Heinrich Schlosser, who was worth 200,000 thalers. Nay, it was currently whispered that he did not credit the existence of Madame Fichte. I stood one day in the courthouse talking with Luther Lawrence when the sheriff introduced through the crowd a number of women who were witnesses in the trial that was pending. As they filed rapidly through the crowd, Mr. Lawrence said, "There go the light troops." Neither Plato, Mohammed, nor Goethe have said a severer thing on our fair Eve. Yet the old lawyer did not mean to be satanic. The ridicule lies in the misplacement of our good angel, in the violence of direction with which this string of maids and matrons are coming with hot heads to testify what gossip they know about Mr. Gulliver or Mrs. Veal, being quite dislodged from that shrine of sanctity, sentiment, and solitude in which they make courts and forums appear absurd. I remember Edward Taylor's indignation at the kind admonitions of Dr. P. The right answer is, "My friend, a man can neither be praised nor insulted." On rolls the old world and these fugitive colors of political opinion, like doves' necks, lustres, chase each other over the wide encampments of mankind, Whig, Tory, pro and anti-slavery, Catholic, Protestant. The clamor lasts for some time, but the persons who make it change. The mob remains. The persons who compose it change every moment. The world hears what both parties say and swear, accepts both statements, and takes the line of conduct recommended by neither, but a diagonal line of advance which partakes of both courses. Aster solidagineus, or solidago bicolor. The poet. The idealist at least should be free of envy, for every poet is only a ray of his wit, and every beauty in his own beauty reflected. He is ever a guest in his own house, and his house is the biggest possible. Exaggeration is a law of nature. As we have not given a peck of apples or potatoes until we have heaped the measure, so nature sends no creature, no man into the world without adding a small excess of his proper quality. Every sentence hath some falsehood of exaggeration in it. For the infinite diffusiveness refuses to be epigrammatized, the world to be shut in a world. The thought being spoken in a sentence becomes by mere detachment falsely emphatic. G. W. Tyler patronizes Providence. The Whig party in the universe concedes that the radical enunciates the primal law, but makes no allowance for friction, and this omission makes their whole doctrine impertinent. The Whig assumes sickness, and his social frame is a hospital. His total legislation is for the present distress, a universe in slippers and flannels with bib and pap spoon, swallowing pills and herb tea. Whig preaching, Whig poetry, Whig philosophy, Whig marriages, no rough, truth-telling Miltons, Rousseaus. Blue heron, loon, and sheldrake come to Fairhaven Pond, raccoon and otter to Walden. The merchant will not allow a book in the counting-house, suspects every taste and tendency but that for goods, has no conversation, no thought but cotton, qualities of cotton, and its advance or fall a penny or a farthing. What a cramping of the form in wooden cap, wooden belt, and wooden shoes is this, and how should not the Negro be more a man than one of these victims? The Negro, who, if low and imperfect in organization, is yet no wooden sink but a wild cedar swamp, rich with all vegetation of grass and moss and confervae and ferns and flags, with rains and sunshine, mists and moonlight, birds and insects filling its wilderness with life and promise. It is plain that none should be rich but those who understand it. Cushings and Perkinses ought to be rich, who incline to subscribe to college and railroad, to endow athenaeums, and open public gardens, and buy and exhibit pictures, liberalities which very good and industrious men, who have earned their money a penny or a shilling at a time, would never think of. Yet what are rich men for? It is a most unnecessarily large and cumbrous apparatus for anybody who has not a genius for it to produce no other result than the most simple contrivance of an acre and a cabin. Every nation to emerge from barbarism must have a foreign impulse, a graft on the wild stock, and every man must. He may go to college for it, or to conversation, or to affairs, or to the successes and mortifications of his private biography, war, politics, fishing, or love. Some antagonism he must have as projectile force to balance his centripetence. Master Cheney says there is the 8-road corn, and the 12-road, and the brindled, and the badger corn, and the Canada corn, and the sweet, and the white, and the Missouri. 50 pounds to the bushel makes corn merchantable, and he weighed a bushel of the Bigelow corn, and there were 70 pounds. Oh, Master Cheney, I catch the tune in your talk, and see well that you have no need of poetry. I see its silver thread gleaming in your homespun. You do not break off your flowers, you plow your crops in. G. W. Tyler came here with all his rattle. The attributes of God, he said, were two, power and risibility. It was the duty of every pious man, he said, to keep up the hoax the best he could, and so to patronize Whiggism, piety, and providence, and wherever we saw anything that would help keep the people in order, schools or churches, or poetry, or what not, he must cry, "Hist, boy," and urge the game on. It was like Eli Robbins's theory of amusements. He sleeps 4 hours from 3 to 7. He outwitted Mr. Greenleaf in the courts. He practiced medicine somewhere in the barracks, and at St. John's, having in a freak called himself a Free Will Baptist, he was immediately carried off to preach at a meeting which he did for 55 minutes, and left the audience in tears, and got up a revival. 1.5 pounds of coffee to a pint of water he drinks every night of the thickness of molasses, and when he had headache he piled a peck of ice on his head by means of an iron hoop. Quote, "Fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise to scorn delights and live laborious days." The philosopher sat with his face to the east until cobwebs were spun over the brim of his pot of porridge. Intemperance is the only vulgarity. Inaptitude. I will never wonder at Mr. Pickens, who said he would not go to Mr. R.'s church until the interesting times were quite over, i.e., until the ordination and personal topics were exhausted. People's personality, their biography, their brother and sister, uncle and aunt are sadly in the way. The novel of De Clifford gave me to think of aristocracy. I should like to have had this and Pericles and Aspasia circulate freely in this country as lessons in the beauty of behavior, which we greatly need. Lessons on personal merit and manners. But this book is superstitious and has no conception of the despotic power of character. But in Miss Edgeworth and in this story of De Clifford, the hero in the crisis speaks with the utmost spirit and nature, and so the scene is blood-warm and does your heart good. This hold we have on the selfish man, that he always values consequences, reputation, or afterclap of some sort, but the benevolent man never looks so far. Let the self-seeker be never so sharp, this unlucky trick of nature is sharper than he, and has him on the hip. False connections have some good in them. All our solitudes yield a precious fruit, and this is the most remarkable of our solitudes. I value the tenderness of a stern nature more than all the tenderness of the susceptible. When such a one is moved, the tears are precious. The only bribe the community has for us is that it permits the association of friends without any compromise on any part, as our other hospitalities do not. We see now sundry persons whose slowness of friendship makes it plain that life is not long enough, with its rare opportunities, that we and they should ever be anything valuable to each other. They are constitutionally good and great, yet only by living in the house with them for years could we realize the promise we read in their eye. They now are only the Lord's pledge to us that worth exists and will somewhere be available to us. What has life more to offer me than assurance? I can forgive anything to a deep nature, for they outlive all their foibles and pedantries, and are just as good 10 years hence, and much better. Strange it is so hard to find good ones. The profound nature will have a savage rudeness, the delicate one will be shallow or have a great crack running through it, and so every piece has a flaw. I suppose that if I should see all the gentry of England pass in review, I should find no gentleman and no lady. It must be genius which takes that direction, i.e., friendship. It must be not courteous, but courtesy, not tasteful, but taste, not gilt, but gold. O men of buckram, and women of blonde, is civilization buckram, and is gentleness blonde? Sarah Alden Ripley is a bright foreigner. She signalizes herself among the figures of this masquerade. I do not hope when I see her to gain anything, any thought. She is choked, too, by the multitude of all her riches, Greek and German, Biot and Bichat, chemistry and philosophy. All this is bright obstruction, but capable she is of high and calm intelligence, and of putting all the facts, all life aloof, as we sometimes have done. But when she does not, and only has a tumultuous time, it is time well wasted. I think her worth throwing time away upon. Eupatorium, white and red. I see only 2 or 3 persons, and allow them all their room. They spread themselves at large to the horizon. If I looked at many, as you do, or compared these habitually with others, these would look less. Yet are they not entitled to this magnificence? Is it not their own? And is not munificence the only insight? We cannot rectify marriage, because it would introduce such carnage into our social relations, and it seems the most rabid radical is a good Whig in relation to the theory of marriage. Yet perhaps we can see how the fact stands in heaven. Woman hides her form from the eyes of men in our world. They cannot, she rightly thinks, be trusted. In a right state, the love of one, which each man carried in his heart, should protect all women from his eyes as by an impenetrable veil of indifference. The love of one should make him indifferent to all others, or rather their protector and saintly friend, as if for her sake. But now there is in the eyes of all men a certain evil light, a vague desire which attaches them to the forms of many women, whilst their affections fasten on someone. Their natural eye is not fixed into coincidence with their spiritual eye. Spiriae tomentosa. Why do I write another line, since my best friends assure me that in every line I repeat myself? Yet the god must be obeyed, even to ridicule. The criticism of the public is, as I have often noted, much in advance of its invention. The ear is not to be cheated. A continuous effect cannot be produced by discontinuous thought, and when the eye cannot detect the juncture of the skilful mosaic, the spirit is apprised of disunion simply by the failure to affect the spirit. This other thing I will also concede, that the man Fingal is rather too swiftly plastic, or shall I say, works more in the spirit of a cabinet maker than of an architect. The thought which strikes him as great and Dantesque and opens an abyss, he instantly presents to another transformed into a chamber or a neat parlor, and degrades ideas. I told Henry Thoreau that his freedom is in the form, but he does not disclose new matter. I am very familiar with all his thoughts. They are my own quite originally dressed. But if the question be what new ideas he has thrown into circulation, he has not yet told what that is which he was created to say. I said to him what I often feel. I only know 3 persons who seem to me fully to see this law of reciprocity, of compensation, himself, Alcott, and myself. And 'tis odd that we should all be neighbors, for in the wide land, or the wide earth, I do not know another who seems to have it as deeply and originally as these 3 Gothamites. This is the end of part 4 of Emerson's journal collection number 32, dating from the year 1841, when the author was 38 years old. In the next video, we will take up in the midst of that year, starting with the subject poetry. Thank you for listening.